Today we are with Chloe Lieberman. She's going to be talking about small-scale dairying with goats and cows. Chloe homesteads near Asheville, North Carolina. She also writes and teaches for Wild Abundance, a school of permaculture, natural building, and homesteading that's just down the road from Chloe's farm. She and her partner raise dairy goats, a milk cow, vegetables, fruits, mushrooms, and herbs. One of Chloe's great loves is growing staple crops, the kind of plants that can be center stage during a meal. Along with growing food, Chloe is passionate about cooking and nutrition. Welcome today, Chloe.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been raising dairy animals for about 10 years, and here is a picture of my barnyard, ever-evolving barnyard, and you can see a little bit of a garden in the foreground and a few of my animals. So I'm excited to talk with y'all today about what it really takes to raise your own milk, cheese, yogurt, butter, ice cream, all the dairy products that so many of us enjoy, what it really takes to see that process through from start to finish. So here's a picture of me 10 years ago when I was first learning how to milk goats. And this is actually at the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center in Northern California, where I was a seasonal intern. And one of the residents there became a dear friend of mine, and she had a small herd of dairy goats. And I wanted to learn. She was willing to teach me, and she was happy to have somebody else on the land who knew how to milk, who could cover her if she ever couldn't make a milking. So she was my first mentor. I've had several mentors, and I just wanted to acknowledge her and acknowledge the process of mentorship I'm pleased to be a part of for all of you through this summit, through this talk, and I hope that you all can find that in various ways in your lives. So when we talk about dairying, it's a form of animal husbandry, and I just want to dig into that term a little bit because it's something that, our relationship with the animals that produce food for and with us in this time and place in the U.S. right now is, in my opinion, a little bit out of balance. We kind of have turned animal agriculture into part of the industrial food system and part of kind of the food producing machine. And when we look at the term animal husbandry, it really means to be in the role of a caregiver or manager. So it's not just about getting something, it's about a bond of care and a relationship between us as humans and the animals that we husband or that we care for, that we take responsibility for. And I wanted to show this cave painting from Algeria. It's a prehistoric cave painting from Algeria, just to show that, animals have been a part of our lives for a very long time. And interestingly enough, the first animal that was domesticated was actually the dog. So we think about our relationship with animals being this kind of give and take where we want something from them like milk or meat or eggs. And, dogs obviously have a functional role to play and had a functional role to play in prehistoric cultures, helping with hunting and protection and such. But there's also this element of just connection, and relationship. And so I am grateful to have that with my animals. It's definitely one of the gifts for me of raising animals, and I encourage you to explore and embrace that too if you're interested in raising animals for milk. Most of the animals that we milk are ruminant animals, not all of them. So ruminant animals include cows, goats, sheep. They also include bison, water buffalo, zebus, deer, even giraffes. There are a couple of animals that are milked in other cultures, specifically camels and horses, that are not ruminants. But most of our dairy animals are ruminants. And what that means is that they have this unique digestive system. So here's an image of how a ruminant animal digests food. And it's really a process of symbiosis. So the rumen is one of the chambers. We often talk about ruminants as having 4 stomachs. And if you want to be technical, they actually have 4 chambers in the sort of stomach part of their unique digestive system. So it's not actually 4 stomachs. It's 4 different chambers that do different things. And these are called, I'm not sure if you can see, it's pretty small on this diagram, but the rumen, the reticulum, the abomasum, and the omasum. And what happens in this process is that a whole community of bacteria and yeast and protozoa and different symbiotic microorganisms ferment the plant material that ruminants eat. So all ruminants are vegetarian. They only eat plants. And they can actually break down cellulose and other fibers into volatile fatty acids. So we, in our digestive systems, cannot break down cellulose. We can break down some kinds of fiber, but cellulose is one of the main components of the structure of plants. And we can't break that down. And so we can't eat grass, for example. We can squeeze the juice out of grasses, like in wheatgrass and things like that, and still get some nutrition from the grass. But we can't get nutrition from that fiber. And ruminant animals can. And they can in this sort of miraculous way whereby they bite off the plants. It goes into this fermentation vat, and this whole host of symbiotic microorganisms break it down and actually turn it into, as I mentioned, these volatile fatty acids. So even though they're vegetarians, they're vegans, they have a diet that's high in fat because of that relationship. And so what this means is that ruminant animals can turn a completely plant-based diet into milk that is high in both protein and fat, and that is something that we can eat as a food. So it's this magic transformation from plants into a high-fat and protein food for baby animals and for us. So I want to talk about some of the benefits of home dairying. And of course, we want to start with dairy products. So if you're interested in raising animals for milk, then I'm sure you're interested in milk and yogurt and cheese and butter and all of the different things, kefir and sour cream and ice cream and all of the different things that we can make out of dairy products. But those are not the only benefits, and those are not the only products that dairy animals can give to you. So another one that many of us probably are thinking about, especially you urban farmers and gardeners, is manure. And this is ruminant poop. And ruminant manure is amazing stuff. It's made of plants, and the digested, decomposing bodies of all those bacteria and different organisms that help them digest. So it's very high in nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and organic matter, along with other compounds. But I mentioned those because, as we gardeners understand, these are some of the main, the 3 macronutrients that plants need to grow. And then organic matter is such an important contributor to soil health. And so manure is an amazing sort of byproduct of dairying, if you will. And if it's managed properly, through a composting process, then it can be an incredible fertilizer and soil amendment that comes along with the milk and the other benefits of raising dairy animals. Another wonderful way that dairy animals can be integrated into your home system, backyard system, or small farm system is as part of the weed management team. And so there's a lot of kind of debate out there. You'll see numbers comparing, like, if we used X amount of land that's used to raise cattle to raise beans, for example, how much more protein we could get for that particular amount of land. And while I think these kinds of studies and figures are very important and informative, especially when we're talking about large-scale animal agriculture, when you pare it down, when you kind of like zoom the lens in on a homestead or a small farm or a backyard kind of system, like the one that we manage here, you kind of see it's a little more complex, as most things are when you really get into the details. And so where we have our animals grazing and foraging and where we harvest food for them, most of those places are not suited for gardening. So they're slopey, they may be, the understory of forests, and eventually we'll have tree crops there, so not enough sun to grow things like tomatoes and zucchinis or beans. Or they're areas of degraded land or overgrown land that may become gardens in the future, but we need to do a lot of work beating back the brush and changing the land and the plant species that are there in order to make them into gardens. So animals can play a role. They can help you to utilize land that otherwise you wouldn't be able to utilize. Plus, putting an animal on a patch of land and having them graze is a lot lower input in some ways than managing a garden. So putting them to graze and then letting the grass grow and then bringing them back in a rotational cycle. Even if all of our pasture land was flat and was appropriate for gardening, we couldn't manage that much garden space. And so incorporating animals can be a way to utilize more space in unique and different and creative ways. So the picture on the right here is my friend Megan, and she has a business called Mountain Goatscapes, where she actually brings her goats and sets up these portable fences to manage overgrowth and invasive plants around town and around people's private property. And so she actually has a business where goats eating plants is like the engine of the business. So I just wanted to show that and give some credit for that photo. And another wonderful thing that comes from raising dairy animals is having a direct connection to the more than human world. And so here on the left is my partner connecting with a little newborn baby goat born that same day. And then on the right, you can see our son. I think he was like 1.5, and our big old Jersey milk cow, Munai, and they're kind of staring each other down. And I find, there's a lot of ways that we can connect with the more than human world, with the natural world. And raising plants is a great way, and I certainly feel connected to the plants that I grow. But there's something about being able to look into the eyes of another mammal in particular, that notice their personalities and notice their preferences. And particularly with the dairy animals, they go into heat cyclically, and so they have kind of like moodiness and changes in behavior around their fertility cycle, and that's something that I as a woman can relate to. And I find raising animals builds this bridge in a way that connecting with the natural world through plants and through other non-mammals doesn't quite do. And so it can really deepen your relationship and your understanding of reciprocity to raise animals. Also, home-raised dairy products can be far superior to store-bought dairy products, both in terms of taste and nutrition. So here's a picture of me with a very full pail of milk after milking, and milk comes out of goats and cows hot, so their basal body temperature is hotter than ours. It's like, I think, 102 or 103. And when you milk fast, when you get good at it, it will create this frothy foam that's kind of like the top of a cappuccino. And it's pretty tasty and fun to sip off of there. And I don't normally sip the milk, before I put it in the fridge. And I don't want to contaminate all of my milk with my mouth bacteria. But in this case, it was going to overflow as I carried the pail. So I'm tasting this delicious fresh milk cappuccino. And yeah, if you've ever tasted home-raised milk, fresh milk, raw milk, it's different, and there are a lot of differences in nutrition in terms of omega-3 fatty acids, certain specific kinds of fatty acids like conjugated linoleic acid, which is really important for the immune system and for the brain, for the development of children's brains, and it's higher in antioxidants. And then depending on the breed of animal you get, home-raised dairy can be higher in protein and fat as well. It tastes better, and you're getting better nutrition from fresh raw milk dairy, if raw milk is what you're wanting to do, than you would from buying dairy at the store. With all of these wonderful things that you get from raising your own dairy animals, there is a lot of work that goes into it too. And so I want to talk about some reality checks, because my hope with this presentation is to give you an understanding of what it really takes to raise your own dairy animals, which kinds of dairy animals you may have the resources, the space, the time, the energy to raise, and what kinds of choices you're going to want to make for your particular situation so that you get set on the right foot. And you don't go in thinking, oh, I'm going to eat ice cream every day. And then you realize, whoa, this is so much work. So I'm going to talk about some reality checks. And in this picture, this is me. And you can see in my back pockets, both of them have a bottle in them. You can see the little red nipples on the top, and that's for bottle feeding baby goats. And in my right hand, I have a pail of cow milk, a big old pail of cow milk, and that's close to 4 gallons of milk. It's pretty darn heavy, and our barn is a little walk from our house. And in my left hand, I have a goat milking pail sitting inside of a tote because I was milking 2 goats at that point, and so I had to pour the milk from the pail into the tote to be able to carry it back. So this is kind of awkward, kind of heavy. I've got the 2 bottles, and at this point, my morning routine was to go out, milk the cow, milk 2 goats, pour some of the goat milk into the baby bottles, give some milk to both of the baby goats that I was bottle feeding in order to build a relationship with them, and then come back, strain all the milk, put it in the fridge, wash everything. And this is every single day. So definitely time is a big reality check. So here are some of the other things that you want to consider and that may be reality checks if you're approaching home dairy. The first one is milk quality depends on the quality of the feed. So a lot of times people think, oh, I'm raising an animal at home, and so therefore the milk is going to, have that higher level of omega-3 fatty acids and antioxidants, and it's going to be really good quality milk. But in fact, the conditions that you raise that animal in, and in particular what you feed them, is going to have a huge impact on the quality of their milk. So if you are, in a backyard situation, you don't have a lot of grass, they're going to be eating mostly hay, you're not going to get all those benefits of like the fresh, fast-growing spring grass and the really, really yellow to golden milk that comes from eating fresh grass, because you don't have fresh grass to feed them. And if you're in an area where you can't get organic feed, then your dairy products are not going to be organic just because they're raised at home. So milk quality really depends on feed quality, and I should say on, the overall health of the animal and the conditions that they're raised in. So ruminants eat a lot. So the feed quality and what you can afford and what you have access to is something to really look into. Ruminants eat a lot of plant material, and you can't always find, as I mentioned, organic hay. We can't even find organic hay here. We are now at the point of making our own hay, but most of you are probably not going to be at that point, I would imagine. And so checking out what kinds of things you're going to have available to you to feed your animals year round. They eat year round. This is probably not a news flash, but they eat year round and they eat a lot. And so checking out what kinds of hay and other supplemental feeds, which I'll go into in a little bit, you have access to, is going to inform your decision, particularly about how many animals you can support. So animals need daily care, and that really means every day. They probably will only be producing for some of the year, because you typically dry up mother animals when they're pregnant towards the end of their pregnancy, so that their body can focus on growing that baby and then making that transition in a healthy way without taxing them too much. So you have to feed them and care for them even when you're not getting milk from them. And when you are getting milk for them, you have to feed them and care for them and milk them every single day. So just looking at your schedule and your lifestyle and considering if you are going to be able to do that, and if not, if you have a support team around locally that can step in when you're not able to. So fencing and housing can be a lot of work, and I'll get more into details on these in a little bit, but just thinking about really getting a good setup before you get your animals can help a lot, especially if you have a garden. Keeping those animals out of your garden is going to be super important. And if you live in a place where it gets very cold or it gets very windy or snowy, then making sure that your animals can stay warm and have what they need is really important. Another thing that unfortunately is a consideration for some folks is that it may not be legal to raise livestock where you live, especially if you live within city limits or in suburban areas or like gated communities and communities that have covenants and things like that. I've heard some funny things about you can have like X amount of chickens but no roosters, and you can have a horse but you can't have goats. There's all different kinds of ordinances in different communities, and so definitely look into your community and if there are any of those before you buy an animal and then have a police officer knocking on your door or a neighbor knocking on your door and telling you that's not actually allowed where you live. Finally, when you add everything up, including the cost to feed, building or procuring housing, your labor, raising animals sustainably and especially organically, it's a serious investment. And it may not be, if you look at high quality, if you're drinking, let's say your family drinks a gallon of milk a week, and if you buy pasture-raised, organic, raw milk from the farmer's market or from a food co-op or something like that, you may be like, whoa, this is so expensive, like $10 or $15 a half gallon. When you look at all the things that it takes and all that you would put into raising your own animal, that price starts to make a lot of sense. It's actually kind of a deal to be able to just pay some money and get that dairy. Obviously, you will be getting a lot more than a gallon a week if you have your own cow, and we'll get into that a little bit later too. But some people get into raising dairy animals thinking that it's like a way to save a buck. And if you have the infrastructure and you're happy to spend the time, it's like actually feeds you, it doesn't feel like a chore all the time to care for the animals, then it can be a way to save on or even, break even by selling some extra. But it's, in my experience, having one or two dairy animals on that small of a scale, it's not really like a business venture or a way to save a bunch of money, especially if you factor in your time. Now we're going to go into talking about goats versus cows, and I hope to help you decide and discern which of these animals is going to be appropriate for you in your situation. And here on the left is my sweet Jersey cow named Munai, and here on the right is an alpine dairy goat that I used to own, is not part of our current herd, named Beja Flor. So these two are representative of the two species for us. So here are some good questions to ask yourself. What kind of milk do you enjoy drinking? So you may be thinking, I only have a small amount of space, and so a goat is more appropriate for me. But if you haven't ever tried goat milk, I really encourage you to try some goat milk, and not the goat milk that you can buy in the store, not the pasteurized, large-scale produced goat milk that you can buy in a health food store, but find somebody who raises goats and drink some fresh goat milk, because a lot of people have a thing about goat milk. They think it has this goaty taste, and it does have a different flavor than cow milk, but when it's fresh and raw, it tends to be quite sweet, and I enjoy it. If I'm going to drink a cup of milk, I actually prefer goat milk over cow milk. Definitely get a sense of what you're getting into. And the same goes for cow milk. You may be familiar with cow milk, but you may not have had fresh raw milk or grass-fed milk, and it does have a stronger taste. It has a sort of a grassy flavor. So definitely check it out and see what you like before committing to raising an animal. Another question to ask yourself is, how much milk do you want or need, and how much time do you have to devote to milking and milk processing? Again, that example of a family that goes through a gallon of milk a week. You are going to get more than a gallon of milk a week with either of these animals, and I'll go into kind of average production for cows versus goats in a little bit here. Determining how much milk you actually want. Do you want to get into cheese making and preserving the milk in that way? Do you want to do a little micro industry and sell some milk? If so, do you have space for that? So we actually have a second whole refrigerator on our back porch. We do have a micro industry with the cow milk and yogurt that I make. And friends can just walk up to the back porch. They don't even need to come into our house. We don't have to be here. And they can help themselves. And there's a little jar for leaving money. It's honor system. It works well for us. But we have the space, and we had the money to invest in an extra refrigerator. And if you don't have those things, then definitely it's worth thinking about where you're going to put all this milk and how much time you're going to have each day to devote to milking and then milk processing. What kind of animal do you like being around? So goats and cows have pretty different dispositions. And if you enjoy the energy of a cow versus a goat, that's a real thing to consider, because this animal is not just going to be kind of out there producing milk for you. They're going to become a part of your family and your community, hopefully, if you want to raise them in a really conscientious and caring kind of way. So which kind of animal do you enjoy being around? Another important question is, are there other people raising this kind of animal nearby? And does anyone you know have experience with caring for or milking this kind of animal? So as I mentioned before, if you're going to go out of town, either if you have a lifestyle where you go out of town regularly, or all of us have things come up where we need to go out of town or just have other things going on at periods throughout the year, you're going to need backup. You're going to need somebody who can care for your animals. And so if there's somebody who already raises, cows, and you want to get a cow, and they're like, oh yeah, no problem. You don't need to teach me every little detail. I already raise cows. I know what to do. You can just show me your routine. That's going to be a lot simpler than teaching your neighbor who has a puppy and has never been around other animals how to deal with a cow. And also, it's just nice to have community. If something weird is going on, like our cow had this funny cyst on her belly the last time that she had a calf, and I wasn't sure what was going on. And I have a wonderful cow raising friend, and I called her up, and she was like, oh yeah, it's this, it's no problem. And it was really reassuring. I don't want to just Google it and get overwhelmed and confused. And I didn't really want to call the vet because that might end up costing money, and it didn't seem like a problem. So just having somebody around that you can bounce ideas off of and collaborate with is really helpful. Is there a local vet who has experience with this kind of animal? So that's really important. If your animal gets sick or has an injury, is there somebody you can call who can help you take care of them? And then do you have the space and infrastructure, or could you create it for this type of animal? And it's really important to keep in mind that all of these ruminant animals that make milk, and definitely cows and goats, are herd animals. So just having one cow or one goat all by themselves without another of their species or a companion animal is not going to be the best choice for them, for their well-being. And when they are not happy, when they're stressed out, then they don't produce well. So you can really notice this. Like, I have had a friend with a rowdy dog come and walk around on our farm, and the next day my animals don't make as much milk because that scared them and that stressed them out. So keeping your animals happy is really important, not just because it's morally the correct thing to do if you're going to be in this husbandry relationship, but also because it will help them to produce more milk and over time be a better member of your whole ecosystem of your backyard farm or garden. So with goats, this can be a little easier because they're smaller. To have two goats rather than one goat. Having two cows is kind of a big deal. We only have one cow, but the cow lives with the goats. There are other kinds of animals. I've seen like YouTube videos of cats that have befriended cows, or different kinds of animals that befriend each other. But I wouldn't bank on your family house cat being a companion animal for your cow. I would think it through, and if you buy a cow who already has lived in more solitary life, or who already has befriended a dog or a cat or something like that, then that can give you a better sense of whether that's going to work for that particular animal. Can you keep at least two of these animals or provide a companion animal? So now let's talk about the temperaments of goats versus cow. They kind of have these archetypal energies, and I found these to be relatively accurate. So goats tend to be higher energy, a little mischievous, jumpy, playful, curious, and they're usually not bigger than a person. So if a goat, gets rowdy, I can usually, and I'm not a super big person, depending on the goat and depending on the breed, I can usually, if a goat is on a lead and wants to run away, I can usually plant my heels into the ground and have more power in my body than that goat because it's not an animal that's bigger than me. Cows tend to be slower moving. They have a reputation for being stubborn, which I have found to be absolutely true. Also, kind of on the flip side of that, they can be quite steadfast, generally calm. That goes along with the slower moving, and they're very large and strong. So here's a picture of a pair of zebus pulling a plow through what looks like, I think, a rice field, which is a hard job. And yeah, if a cow is on a lead and really wants to run away, I don't know how big or strong you are, but you're not going to be able to overpower the cow. Cow is like, my cow I think is about 800 or 900 pounds and very, very strong. So if that is something that intimidates you or you feel uncomfortable with, then that's definitely a consideration. They are still very docile. You can train them. I have felt afraid of my cow when she's in heat and trying to mount me. But other times I haven't felt too afraid of her because I have a relationship and I've worked with animals enough to kind of give her the message that I'm in charge, and we've established that. But if that's not your personality or you don't want to deal with that kind of dynamic, then a smaller animal like a goat might be more appropriate for you. So now let's talk about the milk of these two different kinds of animals. Goat milk is pure white, and this is not because it doesn't have, so beta-carotene is the compound that makes cow milk, fresh cow milk, really creamy, sort of a creamy golden color. And goat milk also has sort of the preformed vitamin A, which is what the beta-carotene gets turned into in our bodies. So both of them are considered forms of vitamin A. So goat milk has just already formed that beta-carotene that the goats get from the green plants that they eat into vitamin A. So it's not a nutritional deficiency that goat milk is pure white and cow milk is creamy and golden, but it's just a different form of that nutrient. Goat milk is also naturally homogenized. So that means the fat particles are naturally suspended within the milk. They don't rise out to the top in the same way that cow milk has the cream rise to the top. And the fat particles in goat milk are also much smaller. They're about the same size as the fat globules, is actually what they're called, not particles. Globules, kind of a fun word to say, as human milk. So goat milk is molecularly more similar to human milk. Goat milk can have around 2 to 6% butterfat, and this depends on a lot of factors, the main one being the breed of goat that you're talking about. And it has a unique, more interesting flavor for those of us raised on kind of standard American diet, used to kind of cow milk being the standard for milk. And this is really nice for making fresh cheeses. So the great example is Chev, which is the soft goat cheese that often most of us think of as like the goat cheese. And if you make that same kind of cheese with cow milk, it's, you know, you can still make a similar cheese, but it's just kind of boring. It doesn't have that like goat milk interesting flavor. And that's the same goes with feta and other sort of fresher cheeses. Goat milk has more different biological compounds in it that lend themselves to more interesting flavors, especially with cheese. And goat milk can be easier for many people to digest. And that's in part due to what I mentioned before about the molecules being very similar in size to human milk. So our systems are just more set up to digest goat milk. However, many people do fine with cow milk. And another reason for that digestibility is that goat milk always has the A2 beta casein. So if you haven't heard of this A1, A2 conversation with milk, I'm just going to break it down, really simplify it a little bit. It's a complex thing, but beta casein is one of the main kinds of protein in milk. And there are different forms. I think it's about 30% of the protein in different kinds of milk is beta casein. And there are different forms of beta casein. And the A2 form is what is present in goat milk, in sheep milk, in water buffalo and zebu milk. And it's considered like an older form. And then cow milk may have A1 or A2 beta casein. And A1 beta casein developed alongside simultaneously with the sort of industrialization of cow raising and dairying with cows. And a lot of studies have shown that A2 beta casein causes less inflammation than A1 beta casein does and is more digestible for humans than A1 beta casein. So if that's something that is interesting to you, I encourage you to look further into that. I'm not going to there kind of is this debate around these things and around the nutritional value of milk in general, and I'm not going to go into that here, but I definitely honor that that's an important debate to be having and an important conversation to have in your community and in your family if you're going to decide to raise a dairy animal, you know, if dairy is a good, healthy food for you. But that's all I'm going to say about that because it's not really the focus of this class. Getting back to goat milk qualities, usually goats produce under a gallon a day of milk. So I have a goat right now who's producing a half gallon a day, and I consider her a pretty good producer, particularly because I do not feed grain. I've had goats that produce about a quart a day. So it depends on the breed. It depends on their nutrition. A lot of different factors go into how much milk they're going to produce each day. But I've never known a goat to make more than 1 gallon of milk a day. Now let's look at cows. So cow milk is a creamy golden color if the cows are eating fresh grass. And as I mentioned, this is the beta-carotene. It's a precursor to vitamin A that comes from the grass and gets made into milk. And the cream rises to the top with cow milk. And this is a very special and important thing. So cow milk can easily be turned into butter. And you can remove the cream and have cream for making cream cheeses, sour cream, creme fraiche, ice cream, all the wonderful things that we can do with cream are much, much easier to do with cow milk than with goat milk. With goat milk, you really, make those things in any kind of quantity, you need a mechanical cream separator, which is basically a centrifuge. And they can be quite expensive, and I've never messed with one just because it doesn't make sense to have one if you just have one goat, in my opinion. But with cows, the cream rises to the top, and you can make butter, which I love to do. And also with cows, they tend to have a little bit more butter fat in their milk, so about 3 to 7%. And again, that varies based on breed, based on time in lactation, based on diet, things like that. And cow milk has a grassy, familiar flavor. So most of us in this country are comfortable with the flavor of cow milk. And going into raw milk and grass-fed milk, the flavor might be a little different than what we're used to, but it's not like so dramatically different. And as I mentioned, cow milk may contain A1 or A2 beta casein, depends on your cow. And cows produce somewhere between 2 and 6 gallons per day of milk. So that's a lot of milk. Right now, I'm milking our Jersey cow, and I milked her through, so she didn't have a new calf this spring. And she's producing about 1.5 gallons of milk per day, which honestly is a fabulous amount. It's like still enough to have plenty for us to make butter, to make yogurt, to sell milk, to sell yogurt. And when she has first freshened, so that's the term of just having had a calf, she's made up to 4.5 gallons a day, and it's a lot to deal with. That's when we were like, we need to buy an extra fridge, and I'm going to learn how to make Gouda cheese and all these things, which all take time and resources. So cows make a lot more milk than goats. Now I'm going to get into kind of the nitty-gritty of milking a goat, and then I'm going to talk about cows as well. So because goats make less milk, you will need a smaller pail and just smaller things in general because they're smaller animals. And same with the milking stand or stanchion, which is what's pictured here. You'll need a smaller one. It's easier to kind of cobble together, again, because goats are not as strong, so you're not restraining a big, large animal. Goats only have 2 teats, and it takes much less time to milk them. So right now I'm milking 2 goats, and it takes about 15 minutes. And I find that there's less force, less physical strength in the hands needed to milk goats, just the way that their udder and their teats are set up. So just to clarify some terms, the udder is the whole udder. It's only one udder per animal. It's the whole thing. And then the teats are like the nipples, basically. And there are 2 of them on goats, and we'll see there's 4 of them for most cows. Occasionally there'll be like a phantom teat, phantom 5th teat. And the 2 teats have orifices that release milk from 2 different chambers within one udder. So just to clarify some terminology there. Animals have just one udder. So a lot of times newbies will be like, oh, her udders are looking big. No, her udder is looking big, and her teats may be swollen or whatever they are. So now let's talk about milking cows. And this is my sweet partner milking our Jersey cow. So you'll need bigger stuff in general. You need a bigger pail, and you may need a tote, which is that container that you pour the milk into if the pail is getting too full, or if you are just wanting to move the already milked milk out of the way of potential kicking or knocking over. And with cows, depending on the cow, you may be able to milk with or without a stanchion or a stand. And the stanchion is the thing you see her head is going through, and that bar moves from side to side. So she walks in, puts her head in, and then we move the bar. So it's not squeezing on her neck, but it's close to her neck so that her head can't fit back through it. And I've had friends who had cows that they just would tie to a post and milk them just right out in the field. And depending on the personality of the cow, sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. I haven't found it to work with my cow. Cows can kick sideways. So as you're sitting there milking, and yes, this has happened to me, they can kick you right in the head or in the shoulder, just straight sideways, like at a right angle from their bodies. Goats also can kick, but they can't kick sideways. And because they're smaller, it can still hurt, but they can't really do the kind of damage that cows do if they kick you. I always tie the hind legs because of this reason, because even if she's kicking not out of frustration, but just trying to get a fly, then she can kick the milk pail, and that's always a sad moment where you do want to cry over spilled milk. So having a milk stand or stanchion, the stand is like the whole thing, and the stanchion is the head locking mechanism, where you can also potentially tie the legs. And this is just a loose tying. It's not like keeping her immobilized completely. Is a good option if you have a cow with that disposition. Cows have 4 teats, and it takes much longer to milk. I have definitely sat there milking for up to an hour, and more force is needed, more hand strength is needed in my experience with milking cows. So now let's talk about how much space you need for these different kinds of animals. On the one side, I put the basic needs, and on the other side, I put pasture raising. So the basic needs, these numbers I got from the Certified Humane Organization, and this is to sell dairy products that have their seal of approval. This is how much space each animal needs to have. So this is really a minimum. And then on the other side is an estimation of how much space you would need to do a proper pasture rotation. So to during the time of green growth in your area, to feed your animals from the land and not buy supplemental hay. You may still be buying supplemental grain or things like that, but not buy supplemental hay. And this number varies greatly depending on the terrain, depending on your location, your rainfall particularly, and if you're irrigating or not, the species of plants that they're eating. So this is not like an absolute number, but it's a good estimate to give you an idea. And I put this little guy on a tightrope in between because for most of us, including me, and I have, we own 23 acres, but it's by no means all pasture. It's a lot of wooded hillside. It's a balance between these two. I mean, we definitely want to give them the minimum and ideally more than the minimum. And it's wonderful to be able to feed them from the land and to feed them fresh, green growing things. And not all of us are going to have 2 acres per cow. So balancing what we are able to do in a way that works for us and also works for the animal is probably where most of us are going to end up. I just want to close by saying thank you, offer a gift to you from us here at Wild Abundance and from myself, and that's a free milking mini course. So this is a video course. You can come with me to my barnyard and I'll show you the steps that I go through for milking both my goats and my cow. And you can learn how to do this and get some tips for your future milking endeavors because obviously if you're going to raise dairy animals, you're going to need to learn how to milk. So thank you so much for being with me today, and I wish you well on your journey with home dairying.
Oh, nice. Wow, that was some amazing information, and I loved the fartichokes.
Yeah.
Artichokes, or Jerusalem artichokes, grow wild in my backyard. They've been growing back there for about 15 years, and they're an acquired taste for sure, so I haven't eaten a whole lot of them, but that just made me crack up when you said that.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your farm.
Yeah, so our farm it's really more of a homestead, so it's not a production farm, although more and more we are selling some farm products, but we own 23 acres here in the southern Appalachian Mountains outside of Asheville, North Carolina, and about 4 of that is like the farm proper, and then the rest is, as I mentioned, a wooded hillside. And we're kind of up in a cove, and we're surrounded by wooded hillsides and some other farm fields. We have 3 main growing fields and a remineralized pasture where we don't actually pasture our animals. We amazingly and crazily, my partner mostly cuts forage with a scythe by hand and carries it to the animals each day because we really don't have enough space. We don't have that 2 acres per cow here to do a pasture rotation. And so we found that this is kind of a way to make the most of the small area that we have with all of these animals. And yeah, we have an old falling down tobacco barn and an old animal barn that were built in the 50s. And we're looking to rebuild those barns sometime soon, which is exciting. And we have this little micro dairy sort of cooperative thing. We have folks who choose a day and they come and get yogurt or milk on that day and give us money. And it's a really sweet thing. They bring jars back, so there's no plastic waste or anything like that. And it's a way to check in with neighbors. We see them once a week and just have a real quick check-in, and it's a nice way to stay connected. We also, my partner has a little fruit tree nursery, and we recently I've been selling sweet potato slips and kind of working on more seed saving and plant propagation. So that's kind of our farm-based business is milk and milk products and also plants and plant products.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing what you've shared today and joining us. We greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.